during this part 2 presentation will be a brief review of the voter registration and the 2020 census. There will be guest speakers from Washington State where voters are able to vote by mail. The 12 propositions, numbers 14 to 25, that are on the California ballot, and through an if you do, if you don't discussion, you'll be able to determine what your decision will be. We'll also talk about job responsibilities of several positions that are up for election. Not specific persons, but the job that they're vying for to be elected on, so that you can better determine what expertise or qualities each candidate in these positions will be able to vote. The presentation today is a collaborative effort brought to you by first the Orange County U.S. Registrar of Voters, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated Orange County Alumni Chapter, the National Council of Negro Women Orange County Section, the Orange County Chapter of the Links Incorporated, the Orange County Heritage Council, 100 Black Women Orange County Chapter, and of course the MUZEO. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat and we will do our very best to respond to those questions. The speakers on today's program will be Dr. Linda Hammond, Mrs. Christina Cesny, Dr. Devera Hurd, Mrs. Nina Boyd, and the Honorable Karen L. Robinson. And it is my pleasure now to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Linda Hammond. Dr. Hammond, if you would unmute.
Yes. Thank you, Carol. I just want to welcome everyone here this afternoon. I'm Dr. Linda Hammond, and I'm here on behalf of the Orange County Chapter of the Links and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. And I'm going to spend a few minutes reminding you about ways to participate in the upcoming November 3rd election. All registered voters here in California will receive a mail-in ballot on or before October 5th. This year, you do not need to request a ballot. They will automatically be sent to you. If you have not registered, you need to do so by October 19th. When you do register, make sure that you do request a vote by mail ballot. You can complete the form to request register to vote at registertovote.ca.gov. If by chance you are not able to register by October 19th, you can register at a vote center. And in addition, you can register at the Register of Voters office. The Register of Voters office here in Orange County is located at 1300 South Grand Avenue, Building C in Santa Ana. Once you have your mail-in ballot, you can complete it and you can actually hold on to it and take it to a voting location on November 3rd if that's your preference. So you can vote in person with your mail-in ballot by taking it to any of the any vote center that's where you could just drop off your ballot. If you need to know where the vote centers are located, you can find that at this website, which is called findmypollingplace.sos.ca.gov. If you do choose to mail your ballot, you can mail it through the U.S. Postal Service, or you can also drop off your mail-in ballot at one of the Dropbox mail-in ballot locations. To find the location of the nearest ballot drop-off box, that can be found at the website caearlyvoting.sos.ca.gov. All of these websites will be placed in the chat, so you don't have to worry about trying to copy them down from my speaking. Regarding mailing your ballot, you do not need to add postage to it. It is already prepaid, but if you want to, you can add a stamp to your ballot. So it will be treated as first-class mail. You may have received a postcard in the mail reminding you that the Postal Service is going to do their best to make sure that they get your ballot in a timely manner to turned in properly. However, we just want to remind you that it's really crucial that you send in your ballot as early as possible, and you definitely want to send it in at least 7 days before the election. When you make sure that you use the envelope provided, and make sure that you complete all the requested information on the envelope, including your signature. In addition, we would like to encourage to make sure that you are registered to vote. You can do that by going to one of these two sites, vote.org or voterstatus.sos.ca.gov. It only takes about 30 seconds to supply the needed information. You might ask, why do I want to do that? Some people are concerned that they might have been removed off of the roll. So this is just a good way to just confirm that you are in fact registered. Even if you think you are, it doesn't hurt to just check and confirm. Once you have voted, make sure that you wear your I have voted sticker to proudly demonstrate that you have fulfilled your duty as a US citizen. So I just want to remind you of a couple important dates. October 5th is the vote by mail ballots will be mailed out. October 19th is the last day to register to vote. On October 30th, the vote centers will open, and on November 3rd is election day. Finally, I just want to remind everyone to not forget about the census. The census is very important. We definitely all need to make sure that we complete it. To complete the census, go to the website 2020census.gov, and don't assume that there's going to be extra time to complete the census. There's been a lot of different information in the news about the changing of the deadline. The last report is that the census deadline has now been set to October 5th. So make sure that you complete the census and get that turned in immediately. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker. Mrs. Cesny, she lives in Washington, D.C., and she would like to share information about her experience of voting by mail. In the state of Washington, everyone votes by mail. Ms. Cesny, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Hammond. I am pleased to be able to share with you my experience, my husband's experience, and friends' experience here in the state of Washington. But first, I'd like to highlight some key dates that led up to statewide voting here in Washington state. In 1983, special elections allowed to be conducted by mail. In 1991, permanent absentee law expanded to allow any voter to join the request by mail list. In 1993, smaller precincts in our area started voting by mail, and smaller the amount of voters was anybody under 200 voters. They all started voting by mail. In 2005, our Washington state legislators established vote by mail as a permanent part of our elections, allowing counties to choose. In 2011, with 38 out of 39 of our counties switching to vote by mail, the Washington legislators required vote by mail statewide. We all receive our ballots and then decide for whom or what we want to vote on, and then take our ballots to voting collection boxes. Many of these boxes you'll find at our local libraries, our community centers, at the post office. They actually have election boxes right by the post office, and at our voting centers. We still have voting centers, so if anyone has any language barriers or need help with voting, or they feel that they need to vote in person, feel better about voting in person, they still can. There has never been an incident of missing ballots or late ballots reported in our state to date. Elections results presented the day of the elections are based off of all early ballot turned in. So it's really important to get your ballot in before the due date. They do take it up till 8 o'clock the night on the voting day. And from my experience just driving past the voting center, there's usually about a 3-mile line just to get in, to drive in, to drop off your ballot. And they actually have people there that will help you put it into your car. So if you don't pull your car straight up next to the box, they can help you get it in there, but it's a long, long line. So you know the turnout, we have a large turnout and people do participate in the mail-in voting process. That night when results are started to come in, the final results aren't until they have finalized the count, and that usually takes a few days, and that's pretty normal even if we did walk-up voting process. There is someone that needs, if anybody needs help, like I said, they can go to any of the voting centers and still cast their vote. The automatic mail-in ballot system has become second nature to most of us here in Washington. And believe it or not, and I don't know if it's been out, but there are other states that already have this process in part of their voting process. Oregon State, Colorado, Hawaii, and Utah are already voting by mail also. And I know the state of California is moving in that direction. Since COVID-19, I think it's pushed people to look at this as a valid process because of voting in person does happen in small enclosed areas, and it's hard to keep the distance that you need to be safe. I just want to remind everybody that vote by mail is really easy. It's safe, and all you have to do is fill it out, put it in your post box, or drop it off at any of the ballot locations, and your vote is in. And they even have a system that you can track your ballot, so you can see the process on where your ballot is, and they'll send you emails and email alerts on when your ballot has been processed in and counted. I hope everybody feels better about the process. It works. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Devera Hurd, who will present about the 12 propositions on the California ballot on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I hope that people really enjoyed hearing about the mail-in ballot because we've heard positives and negatives, and so hopefully this will be helpful. Can you hear me? Very good. So we wanted to start with the information about voting as we had presented in part 1, as well as census, and then add the information about Washington State. And in addition, we want to talk about the propositions. Now, please remember that usually when people get their ballots, and usually you get your booklet like this, and it has pages and pages and pages of information about the propositions and the people that are to be elected. Usually what happens, people's eyes just kind of glaze over, and then they listen to everything that somebody has said, whether they know them or not, and they vote accordingly. But what we're trying to encourage you to do is to be an informed voter so that you know what the ramifications are. It is not our purpose today to tell you how to vote, be it for a person or a proposition. Our purpose is to inform and to encourage you to be informed. Please remember as we proceed, you'll put any of your questions in the chat box. That will be monitored by Carol Latham for us, and we will attend to those questions as we go on. So with that, let me start. I'm going to spend a little more than a few minutes, about 27 minutes, talking about the propositions. I'll try to speak quickly, but not so quickly that we lose information. So let me share my presentation with you. All righty, tidy. So here we go. Let's start from the beginning. That always seems to be a good place to start, right? So the California propositions, of which there are 12, And the reason they're thought that there are only 12 this time is because a lot of propositions are put on the ballot by the legislature or by collecting signatures. And with the climate as it is now with COVID-19, it's been difficult to collect signatures. So you'll see that we have 12, but important, here we are. There are 12 on the ballot. The propositions are proposed laws presented to the public for a vote. Propositions can make new laws, change existing laws. Sometimes they can change California Constitution. They can be placed on the ballot, as I said, by people collecting signatures or by state lawmakers. A proposition passes and becomes law if it receives more than 50% of yes votes. Proposition 14 to 24, Proposition 14 to 24 are what we call initiatives. With an initiative, if you vote yes, that means you support the way the proposition would change things. If you vote no, and there's more than 50% that vote no, that means you want to leave things the way they are. Proposition 25 is a referendum, which means that the voters decide on a law that was already passed. For a referendum, if a yes vote is calculated, that means you support the law and want to keep it. If it's a no vote, it means you do not want the law to go into effect. So let's start with Proposition 14. Proposition 14 deals with stem cell research. The way it is now, and this is the format I'm going to use. I'm going to talk about how it is now, and then I'm going to talk about what would change. The way it is now, stem cells are a special type of human cell that is used for medical research. They can grow into many different types of cells, such as brain cells or heart cells, and they're finding out many other things. Stem cells are used to find treatments for many kinds of diseases. In 2004, California voters approved $3 billion in bonds to pay for research and medical studies using stem cells. Prop 14, what it would do if it passes, would allow the state to sell 5.5 billion new bonds to pay for more stem cell research and medical treatments. 1.5 billion from the bonds would go to research and treatment for brain disease, such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. The effect on the state budget, the total cost to repay the bonds plus the interest would be around $7.8 billion. The state would pay around $260 million each year for the next 30 years. If the state's stem cell research leads to new medical treatments, the state would get some money to use for patient treatments, and this amount would be received and used toward the repayment of the bonds. Prop 15, taxes on commercial property. The way it is now, land used for businesses and shopping centers is called commercial property. Owners of commercial property pay taxes based on how much the property was worth at the time it was purchased. These taxes go up by a small percent each year. Money from property taxes goes to local governments. These include cities, counties, public schools, school districts, special districts, such as library and fire districts. What would it do if it passes? It would change the rules for taxes on commercial property. Commercial property would be taxed based on what the property is worth now, instead of small increases each year based on its purchase price. The new rules would only apply to people and businesses that own more than $3 million in commercial property. There would be no change to taxes on residential homes. Prop 15 will also lower taxes on business equipment such as machines or computers. The effect on the state budget: local government would get between 6.5 billion and 11.5 billion more in property taxes each year starting in 2025. The range is big because it is hard to estimate how much commercial property will be worth each year. Counties might need to spend more money collecting property taxes. Proposition 16. It allows public agencies to consider diversity the way it is now. In 1996, California voters passed a law that prevents public programs from using affirmative action when making decisions about public education and public employment, when deciding who gets into college or who to hire. Public schools and agencies are usually not allowed to consider a person's race, sex, color, ethnicity, or country that they come from. What will happen if Prop 16 passes? Prop 16 would allow public colleges, universities, and agencies to include race, sex, color, ethnicities, and country of origin as part of their decision-making. They would be allowed to create affirmative action programs to increase diversity or to help certain groups. Effect on the state budget: Proposition 16 would have no direct effect on state or local budgets. Costs would depend on choices made by state and local programs. Prop 17, voting rights for people who have completed their prison term. After someone ends their prison term for a serious crime, they may spend time on parole when they get out of prison per the sentence. People on parole must follow certain rules, such as meeting regularly with their parole officer. Parole usually lasts about 3 years. Around 50,000 people are on parole in California. People on parole are not currently allowed to vote. People who are on parole, however, pay taxes and follow all laws. If Prop 17 passes, it would allow people on parole to register to vote in elections, to register to vote and then vote in elections. Certain people on parole would be allowed to run for public office. But let me say that people must meet the qualification for those offices just like anybody else. The effect on the state budget: Prop 17 would update the state's voting system. This would cost the state a one-time payment in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Counties might spend more money sending out voter information or counting ballots. This would cost counties in the hundreds of thousands of dollars each year statewide. Proposition 18, voting rights for 17-year-olds. Now listen before you pass judgment. The way it is now, 17-year-olds who are US citizens can pre-register to vote in California. They can only vote if they have turned 18 by election day. If it passes, however, Proposition 18 would allow 17-year-olds to vote in primary elections or special elections if they will be 18 years old by the general election in November. The effect on the state budget: Prop 18 would increase the number of people who could vote. And just for your information, there's been research to show the younger people, when they have a chance to vote, they get involved and stay involved in voting. County election officers would need to spend more money sending out voter information and counting ballots. For each election cycle, Proposition 18 would cost up to $1 million statewide. The state would also need to update voter registration systems, and this would cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Prop 19, changes in property tax rules. You must pay property tax if you own a home. Taxes are based on how much the property was worth at the time it was purchased and goes up by a small percent each year. Homeowners in special groups, such as over 55, can buy a new home without paying higher property taxes in some counties once in their lifetime. If you inherit a home from your parents or grandparents, your property taxes may also be lower. Money from property taxes goes to local governments such as cities, counties, public schools, and special districts. However, what Proposition 19 would do if it passes? Prop 19 would expand the property tax rules for people in special groups. This includes people over 55, people who are disabled, and people affected by a natural disaster. These homeowners would keep their lower property taxes when moving to a new home anywhere in the state, up to 3 times. They could also get a tax discount when moving to a more expensive home. People who inherit a home could pay lower taxes if they live in the house full time. Taxes would go up on inherited homes worth more than $1 million. The effect on the state budget, Prop 19 would increase some taxes and lower others. Local governments would gain tens of millions of dollars per year in the first few years, and then a few $100 million per year over time. More local money for schools might save the state tens of millions of dollars or more in some years. Counties would need to spend tens of millions of dollars each year to measure and collect property taxes. Prop 20, changes to criminal penalties and parole. The way it is now, felonies are considered by the legal system to be the most severe crimes. Less severe crimes are called misdemeanors. When people get out of prison for a felony, they may spend time on parole. Over the past 10 years, lawmakers and voters have reduced punishments for people convicted of some non-violent crimes. This has let some people out of prison early. What would happen if Prop 20 would pass? Prop 20 would undo parts of the crime laws passed by lawmakers and voters over the past 10 years. Some petty theft crimes would be punished as felonies. People convicted of stealing more than $250 to $950 could be sent to county jail for up to 3 years in some cases. Prop 20 would also change the factors that can be considered for early release from prison and limit early release for people convicted of some felonies. The state would collect DNA from adults convicted of some misdemeanor crimes, such as drug possession, shoplifting, and domestic violence. The effect on the state budget? The effects of Prop 20 would depend on how the law is applied and if it is challenged in court. If Prop 20 fully took effect, it could increase cost of law enforcement courts and the correctional system in the tens of millions of dollars each year. Law, governments, and rent control. Housing costs in California tend to be higher than other states. Several California cities have rent control laws that limit how much landlords can increase rents each year. State laws prevent rent control on single-family homes and housing built after February 1st, 1995. Landlords can charge any amount they want when a new renter moves in. Landlords must also allow to increase rents on certain renters enough to make a profit each year. A new state law limits rent increases 5 to 10% each year, depending on inflation. This law applies to housing that is more than 15 years old and will be in effect until 2030. What Prop 21 would do if it passes? Cities and counties would pass rent control rules for housing that is more than 15 years old. Communities could limit how much a landlord could increase rent when a new renter moves in. Landlords could raise rent by up to 15% over 3 years on new renters, plus any increase allowed by local law. Prop 21 would also apply to landlords who own more than 2 housing units. Local rent control laws would still need to allow landlords to make money each year. The effect on the state budget, Prop 21 could decrease money made from the state and local taxes. Governments could see decreases in the high tens of thousands, tens of millions of dollars each year. Effects would depend on how many cities and counties pass rent control laws and how landlords would respond. We're almost done. Prop 22, rideshare and delivery drivers. Let me remind you, an independent contractor can choose when, where, and how much to work. An employee has their schedule and work set by their employer. Employees get benefits and protections that independent contractors do not. These include minimum wage, overtime pay, paid off if they are sick. Rideshare and delivery apps include companies such as Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, just to name a few. These companies currently hire drivers as independent contractors. A 2019 state law required rideshare and delivery companies to hire drivers as employees instead of as independent contractors. The state attorney general and 3 cities are suing Uber and Lyft for refusing to follow the state's new law. Now, what would happen if Prop 22 would pass? Rideshare and delivery drivers would stay as independent contractors. Rideshare and delivery companies would have to pay drivers 20% more than the local minimum wage for time spent driving. These companies would have to help pay health insurance costs for contractors who drive more than 15 hours per week and pay medical costs when a driver is injured while working. Prop 22 would also limit cities and counties from putting new rules on rideshare and delivery companies. The effect on the state budget, Prop 22 would lead to small increases in income tax paid by rideshare and delivery company drivers. By keeping drivers as independent contractors, rideshare and delivery companies would likely earn higher profits. Proposition 23, kidney dialysis clinics. If a person's kidneys stop working, as you know, they may need special treatment called dialysis. In California, dialysis is usually provided by licensed dialysis clinics. A patient's personal doctor must visit them at least once per month during treatment at a dialysis clinic. Dialysis treatment is paid for by Medicare, Medi-Cal, and private insurance. Private insurance pays more money for treatment than Medicare and Medi-Cal. If it passes, proposition would require dialysis clinics to have a licensed doctor, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant present during all treatment hours under the auspices of the county health department. Clinics would have to report any dialysis-related infections to the state every 3 months. Clinics would need permission from the state before closing or reducing services. Clinics would not discriminate against clients based on their insurance or how they are paying for their treatment. The effect on the state budget? Budget effects would depend on how dialysis clinics respond to Prop 23. Dialysis companies might close some clinics or try to charge more money for treatment. Healthcare costs for state and local governments would likely increase in the low tens of millions of dollars per year. The state would spend in the low millions of dollars per year to enforce Prop 23. These state costs would be paid for by increasing the licensing fees. Prop 24. Okay, we're almost there. Changes to consumer privacy laws. A consumer is someone who buys or uses a product or service. That's all of us. Businesses collect data about consumers for many reasons. They may sell the data to other companies or use it to improve their services. A state law called the California Consumer Privacy Act allows consumers to find out what data companies are collecting about them, tell business to stop selling their personal data, and have their data removed from a company's files. If it passes, people would have some increased power over their personal data. Customers would contact companies to prevent them from sharing or using sensitive personal information. This includes local data, health information, or private communications. Prop 24 would also create a state agency to enforce these rules and issue fines to companies that break privacy laws. The effect on the state budget: a new state agency would cost the state $10 million or so per year. Enforcing privacy laws would likely cost the state in the low millions of dollars each year. Fines on companies breaking customer privacy laws would help pay for the state's cost. The effect on local government budgets is unclear. Now, here we are, we're at the home. A reminder, a referendum, which Proposition 25 is, asks the voters to decide on a law that was already passed. For a referendum, let me remind you, a yes vote means that you support the law and want to keep it. A no vote means you do not want the law to go in effect. So, excuse this busy slide, but let me try to cover it. Yes or no on getting rid of Bell. The background. Prop 25 asks voters to decide if the state should get rid of Bell. When a person is charged with a crime, they may have to stay in jail while waiting for a trial. One way that people are released from jail is by paying bail. Bail is money used to guarantee that a person will return to court. The state passed a law in 2018 that would replace bail with a new system. The law has not yet gone into effect. Under the new system, people charged with less serious crimes would be released without having to pay bail. Courts would determine if people charged with more serious crimes should be released. If a judge could keep someone in jail if the judge decides they are a danger to the public or might not return to court. Certain people released from jail could be required to check in with a probation officer or wear a tracking device. What would happen if it passes? Voting yes on Prop 25 would get rid of the bail system and allow the state's new law to go into effect. People charged with less serious crimes would be released before trial. Judges would decide if people charged with more serious crimes would be released or kept in jail, based on whether they are considered a danger to the public or might not return. A no on Prop 25 would keep the state's current bail system in place. The effect on the state budget: getting rid of bail would cost the state and local governments in the mid-hundreds of millions of dollars each year. Counties would save in the high tens of millions of dollars each year due to lower jail costs. See, I told you you could make it through all of them. But please don't stop here. Keep seeking information. Do not totally rely on what I've just presented. Be a consumer of information and search out more information. Look and listen to opinions that are stated about the propositions, but listen carefully. Pay attention to who you are speaking to or reading about. Notice who the supporters are, giving you the information. For example, who's paying for that information. If the pros and cons, again, look at who's submitting these opinions and consider the bias to determine if it matches your values. Now, let's have some questions. Carol, do we have any questions?
So far, you've covered everything. There is just one.
Yes.
Actually, it's just more of a statement that the overview of the propositions have been very helpful and appreciated. I have no other questions in the chat from any of our guests.
Well, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the League of Women Voters. They put a lot of great information out for the normal consumer to just go and access. It's so helpful to use that source. I know when I was a little girl, I couldn't wait to be a senior citizen so I could be a gray hair, go into court and listen to all of the laws and then share the information. Well, heck, now that I'm there, I got to think that one over again. But it was a great opportunity to go into that. So you're very welcome. If you want to go to the League of Women Voters,
there is one question that just came up, and it was, do you have the hours of the Orange County Registrar's office? And I don't know.
I don't know,
Perhaps
but
Linda.
Linda, you can look that up if you can right quick, and then come back and let us know. I think it's 8 to 4, but we'll look it up and we'll find out. Okay. But again, let me tell you, it's called easyvoterguide.org, and that is from the League of Women Voters, and they can help you. So with that, thank you for paying attention. Now, let me introduce our next segment. Our next speaker will discuss information about the responsibilities of elected officials. You're going to be asked to vote for on November 3rd. We thought it best to kind of keep it in the county, but we of course want to share information about our national as well. So with that, Mayor Pro Tem Leticia Clark, would you please take it from here?
Thank you, Devera. Thank you for that very insightful and informative presentation. I think everyone on the call can see that we have a lot to review this election, and I'm going to make a plea that, you know, we're inundated with information during the election season. This is a full-time job to remain engaged and to remain informed, and we can't expect to be able to digest all of this information in a few weeks before the election. So I had a whole presentation about what each position does, from the president to city council. We do have a speaker that needs to go pretty soon, so I'm going to let her go and introduce her quickly, because we do want to focus on the local level and what policymakers and those in office, what responsibility they have and what expectations we should have of them as citizens and residents. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Honorable Judge Karen Robinson. She has allowed some time, set aside some time to be with us today. And I know you have to go quickly, so I'll just let you get into your presentation, and we appreciate you and excited to learn more about what you do each day. You'll have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm so used to the host unmuting me on presentations. Thank you very much for letting me go out of order. I do have a calendar here that I've got to get to. I am an Orange County Superior Court judge. I was appointed by the governor in 2003. I have been reelected several times in uncontested elections. So I'm here to talk a little bit about judges and what our role is and what our job duties are. Judges are public servants. Roughly 90% of us were appointed by the governor, and the remaining 10% are elected. We all serve a 6-year term, and we must stand for re-election at the end of our term. The way the governor gets appointments is a judge may die during their term, or a judge may retire during their term. And a lot of judges select to retire during their term to give a governor the opportunity to appoint. Those that go full term and the judge doesn't ante up for the next election, that becomes an elected judicial position. Most judges are not challenged for re-election, and there are many reasons for that probably are obvious. It is very expensive to run an election in a county the size of Orange County. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. The ballot statement alone is very expensive, and it costs over $1,500 just to apply to be on the ballot to run for the position of a judge. It's also hard to oust an incumbent. And sadly, it's hard to get the electorate interested in judicial races. Those are some of the reasons that you see uncontested judges races. But they are very, very important. And I encourage everybody to become engaged, just as you get engaged in your mayors and your city council people and the president, vice president. Please get engaged in judicial races because as I'll talk about in a moment, we make important decisions to all of you, and you do have an opportunity to be involved in the selection and retention of some of us on the bench. So once appointed or elected, what does a judge do? All of us, no matter what area we're assigned to, have a duty to interpret the law, to apply it to the facts before us, and to determine whatever the outcome is of the case before us for resolution. So the areas that we're assigned to generally, we have criminal lawyers. I am a criminal lawyer. My assignment is criminal. I handle felonies, the more serious crimes. We have civil attorneys. They handle all the civil disputes, breach of contract, personal injury, medical malpractice. If there is a question about an election, that goes to the civil judges. We have family law judges. They handle dissolution of marriages, divorces, custody issues, adoptions, anything related to family issues. We also have probate and estates. They handle wills and trusts. When someone dies and they have an estate, how does that estate get divvied up? Is there a will that tells how the estate gets divvied up? If there isn't, then it goes through probate, and those are state rules that decide how it gets divvied up. And they also deal with conservatorships. That's when people are no longer able to take care of their own affairs and someone's appointed to assist them. And then we have our juvenile court, which handles all things dealing with minors, 17 and under. Criminal cases involving minors, minors who may have been charged with murder, molestation, rape, any of the things that adults do, but they are juveniles, are handled in juvenile court. So no matter what area we're assigned to, all of us have a duty to interpret the law, apply it to the facts before us, and determine the outcome of whatever is presented to us for resolution. So because I'm a criminal lawyer, judge, I want to talk a little bit about what I do on a daily basis, just to give you some perspective. And I'm going to start from the very beginning, and I'm going to move pretty quickly. So an incident occurs, whatever that may be in society. There's a phone call of a rape, there's a phone call of a murder, there's a phone call of an assault, there's a phone call of a burglary, a residential burglary. Some call comes in. Police are involved. They go out, they investigate. A suspect is identified. A report then is written by law enforcement of whatever their investigation was, what conclusions they have reached, and that is submitted to the district attorney of the county. The district attorney gets the police report, all of the evidence that's provided with that police report, reviews it carefully to determine whether there's enough, and they have to make a determination based on that information if there's enough to find that suspect guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in order to file charges. They make that determination, they conclude there is enough, they file a complaint against the suspect. That suspect now becomes a defendant in a criminal case. The first, there are 3 levels of crime, and that was covered a little bit in the presentation going over the propositions. There is the lowest level, which is an infraction, and all of us may be familiar with that if you have ever gotten a traffic ticket or know someone that's gotten a traffic ticket. Those are considered infractions. They are punishable by a fine only, some monetary fine. Then there are misdemeanors. That's the second highest level of crimes. Petty theft, trespassing, assault, battery, disturbing the peace, some low-level domestic violence cases, first-time DUIs with a low blood alcohol level. These types of cases, misdemeanors, are punishable by a fine and confinement in local county jail for not more than a year. So those are misdemeanors. Then you have the felonies. Those are the rapes, the murders, the child molestations, the carjackings, the DUIs with serious injury, drug offenses, kidnapping, stalking, all of those sorts of cases where the punishment is more than a year and it's served in state prison or local county jail via state prison, or by death. So that is those crimes that constitute felonies. So once the complaint has been filed, the prosecutor has made a determination as to whether that crime rises to the level of a misdemeanor or to a felony. The process for both is generally the same, whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor. The first stage is the defendant comes into court for the arraignment on that charge. That's where they are notified of the charge that it's been filed against them, and they are advised of their rights. Their rights include entering a plea to that charge, not guilty or guilty. Those are their choices. Most people at the arraignment stage enter a not guilty plea. That then results in the case getting set for 2 more dates. A pretrial, where the parties come together with the judge to discuss the case and possibly resolve it or figure out what else is necessary in order to resolve it. For felonies, you then, after the pretrial, go to a preliminary hearing. That preliminary hearing is the point at which the prosecution, the district attorney, has to present enough evidence that convinces the magistrate, and judges act as magistrates for preliminary hearings, that convinces the magistrate there is articulable, reasonable suspicion to believe that the defendant committed the crime, and he is or she is the person that did it. If the magistrate is convinced of that at the conclusion of the preliminary hearing, then that defendant is held to answer to those felony charges for trial. If it is a misdemeanor, if the case is not resolved at the pretrial stage where the parties come together with the judge, we talk about the facts, we talk about the evidence. Sometimes there is early taking of responsibility by people who know that they have committed the crime and see no value in prolonging or continuing out the process, and they just want to get the best deal that they can because they are taking responsibility early on. So we have a lot of opportunity as judges to resolve matters at that stage. Those that don't get resolved there, where the people, the defendants want their day in court for misdemeanors, they get set for the jury trial. So judges at the preliminary hearing stage for felonies have another option if after they hear all the evidence, they agree that the prosecution has presented evidence to support the crime going forward for trial. But they also have an opportunity, the judges, to look at that crime and determine whether it should be a felony or if it can be reduced to a misdemeanor, because based on the evidence the judge has observed, it more properly should be characterized as a lower level of offense, as a misdemeanor. So that gives the judge some discretion to exercise their power to reduce a felony to a misdemeanor. Not all crimes are subject to a reduction. Murder cannot be reduced, rape cannot be reduced, the more serious felonies cannot be reduced. But there is a substantial number of felonies that can be reduced to misdemeanors in the court's discretion based on their observation, understanding of the facts, and also the defendant's background. All right, so once a case goes to a felony is determined, they get past the preliminary hearing, the prosecution has presented enough evidence, then an indictment is filed. That indictment is the charging document for the case going forward that the person has to answer to. Lots of work goes in before there is the trial, and the judge has a lot of opportunity to participate in still resolving that matter, reaching some resolution in that matter. But this time is where the parties have time to develop the evidence. And then as the case gets ready for trial, there are pretrial motions that are filed that the court is called on to rule on. And those include motions about evidence. The parties will want to exclude certain evidence because they believe it's not relevant or will be highly inflammatory, such that any relevance that it would have would be outweighed by its prejudicial effect. The judge has to rule on those issues after it conducts a hearing about them. So the judge has a significant role to play in determining what evidence is presented at the trial. There is a tremendous body of rules that the judge is guided by, and so you want in your judicial officers someone that looks at those rules, knows those rules, and abides by those rules fairly for everybody, no matter who that person may be before them. All right, so once the case, all the evidence is determined, the witnesses are established, we're ready for trial. There's jury selection. Jury selection involves the court and the parties getting to ask the jurors questions to determine if they're well suited to hear the case. There are some jurors that exhibit a bias outright, and once the parties explore, the judge and the parties' attorneys explore that, it's determined that they aren't suited for this particular case. Perhaps they had someone who was murdered in their family and it's too difficult for them to sit through a murder trial, or perhaps they know someone that's been a victim of the charges and they just simply cannot be fair in a case like that. They may be better suited for a different case where they don't have that experience, but that's what the court and the attorneys are determining now in trying to get a jury that's going to be fair to both sides in the case. Once the jury has been decided and both sides agree on the 12 people who are selected and the alternates that are selected to hear the case, then we get to the trial. And the trial is the presentation of opening statements, the presentation of the evidence, and then closing argument. Once we get through all of that process, and the judge's role during that process is basically that of a referee. At that point, they're sitting on the bench, they're listening to the evidence. If someone objects to a certain evidence, the judge has to rule on that and admonish the jury as to what they can do with that evidence. Once the case is ready for submission to the evidence, submission to the jury for their determination of the issues in the case, the court and the attorneys decide what the jury instructions are going to be. This is also a very important part, a role that the judge plays. And again, this is where the judge has to know the law, has to know what evidence was allowed in the case and what that evidence supports in terms of charges. If the prosecution had charged murder and the evidence that was presented during the trial clearly does not support a murder conviction, then the jury will not be instructed on murder. If the evidence in the case on a murder trial does support a finding that that happened, the jury would have to make that decision based on the evidence. But if there had been enough evidence for the jury to make that determination, then the jury will hear instructions on what they need to do to be able to conclude that based on the evidence. In a jury trial, the court is not making the final determination as to whether the defendant is guilty or not. That is the sole function of the jury. And in a criminal case, the jury's verdict must be unanimous. That means all 12 people must agree to whatever the verdict is. If the verdict is 12-1, no matter what that one is, there is no verdict. And the judge will have some options at that point if there is a jury that doesn't reach a unanimous verdict. One option, the judge could declare a mistrial, and then there would be argument as to whether or not the defendant should stand trial again. If the vote was close, for example, or not close, if it was maybe 6-6, and the judge will always get from the jury where they stood on the polling once the judge has declared a mistrial, to just get some information about whether the case should be retrialed or if it's one that will be impossible for 12 people to ever agree on. But that's another role that the judge has at the conclusion of the case. Also, once the jury returns their verdict, if the verdict is not guilty, there's nothing left to do but dismiss the charges against the defendant, and the defendant goes free. If the jury comes back with a guilty verdict, then the judge is the one that determines what the sentence will be. And this involves knowing about the defendant's history, ties to the community, family relationships, education, support, and also their other, if they have any, criminal history and background. The judge will use all of this and could also ask for the preparation of a pre-sentencing report to help them determine what the final sentence would be. Things that you want to look for in picking a judge, now that you've heard what all of this is about, should be pretty obvious. You want to ask yourself first, does the candidate understand that they are a public servant? We are here to serve the public. We are here to make sure that the laws are interpreted properly, the facts are applied to those laws, and results are based on the law. We want to do that fairly and equally to everyone who appears before us. You want to know what the candidate's experience, training, and skills to do the job are. What is their education? Where did they go to law school? What is their job experience? What kind of jobs have they had as an attorney? And how does that relate to the assignment that they have? Are they able to handle high volume, overburdened calendars while ensuring that every single litigant has a fair opportunity to be heard? What's their experience on the bench? Did they ever serve as a temporary judge? Those are attorneys who volunteer to help the court out and serve in some civil small claims cases or in traffic cases as judges. Do they have any of that experience? Do they have any biases from their past or current? When I was appointed to the bench, we didn't have the internet in the way that we have it now. So none of us were out there blogging and sharing our opinions about what we think about this or that before we became or even wanted to be judges. Now, people have to think about what they've done in their life, what they've blogged about, what they've talked about, what they've said online, because all of that is there for someone to pull out and say to a candidate, hey, back in 19 or 2020 or 2015, in response to this issue, you wrote about this. How, if someone appears in front of you that falls into that group that you were talking about, can you be fair to that person? So you want to know if that person has any biases from their past or their current lives, and what they've done to either overcome them, because people grow, people change, people get educated, and everybody should have the opportunity to explain how they've grown, how they've changed, and why they have. And you should consider that in making your determination. And you want to give them, the candidates, an opportunity to address those issues. Also, parties, witnesses, attorneys, and court personnel may come from a race, religion, community, lifestyle that's very different from the judicial candidates. You, as someone voting, want to know how they will ensure access to the courts and fairness for all, no matter what their background is. So we all have a duty to promote public trust and confidence in the court. And one way we do that is with community outreach. So you may also want to know the candidates' community contacts and the quality of that community contact. Is it recent? Only because they knew they wanted to run for office? Or have they been a long time person giving back to their community, working to improve the community, working to resolve problems in the community? So those are things that you want to look into. And I think that's probably more than my 10 minutes, but I hope I've given you some indication of what we do on the bench and have helped you to understand things that you can look for when there are judicial candidates on the ballot. Thank you.
Judge Robinson, thank you so much. And I know you have to go, so if you have to log off, but we did get some questions. I snapshotted them with my phone, and I will send you those questions in case you want to respond, and we can send them to this group. But I don't think I've ever gotten such an in-depth review of what the judges do at a local level. And you're a great example of a judge who considers himself a public servant, is always involved in the community, is open and accessible, and given so much discretion that is involved in this entire process, it's really incumbent upon the citizens to not only show up to jury duty, but be very informed about who is on the ballot, because we have a hand in how some of these decisions are made, and what we see on the news play out on the news often, we don't know our power of influence way before it even gets to that point sometimes. So that's what we wanted to do today. You helped us accomplish that from the judicial perspective. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and my apologies. This is incredibly informative. I would love to stay and listen to the rest of it. I will look forward to doing that when it's online. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Next, everyone, and we don't have much time. We promised you that this event would be over near 2 p.m. I want to bring on our next speaker, who represents the Orange County Board of Education, the Department of Education. And, you know, as we're thinking about all of the crises that we're in right now, the pandemic, social unrest, economic downturn, our students and our schools are impacted in a great way. And at the local level, and speaking on behalf of a city council member, I'm often asked about what I can do about the schools. And that shows me that the electorate does not always know what our roles are and how they differentiate from the council to the school board, et cetera. So Nina Boyd is the Associate Superintendent of Community and Student Services, and she's also the liaison for the Orange County Board of Supervisors. She serves in other roles as well. She's on the Orange County Business Council Board, and she's very active in the community. But she's going to help us not only understand what the Department of Ed has had to do during this crisis, but give you a good understanding of what their role is in terms of responding to some of the crises that we've been dealing with now. And when it's time for you to vote for those Board of Education members, what you should be keeping in mind and what they actually have the power to influence. It's important that you know that, and she's going to help us kind of tailor that perspective. Nina?
Hi, and good afternoon to all of you. I know that we're short on time, so I'm going to quickly go through, and I'm going to talk about 3 key areas that I think are very important for voters to understand. You have your local school board who has oversight of the local school district in your community. You have the County Board of Education who has some county oversight, and then you have the Orange County Superintendent of Schools. All of those are elected positions. And I'll start with the local school boards because I know that in this upcoming election, there are many school board members that are up for re-election, as well as there are new individuals who are presenting their credentials to run for office. And it's interesting that elected or applicants for these elected positions for school boards do not have to have any credentials other than to be a good citizen and in standing and submit the petition and the paperwork in order to get on the ballot. And so from that standpoint, they don't have to have an educational background. They don't have to be certificated in terms of being an instructional leader. They just have to have an interest to serve. And so you will see the dynamics of different individuals coming forward for a variety of reasons. The positions are supposed to be bipartisan because it's not a political issue to educate kids. It is every student's right to have a good, equitable education, and our school board members need to be held accountable for that. School board members are responsible for the fiscal and the budget within districts, and our smallest district, the school budget is approximately $70 million, and our largest has over $500 million responsibilities. So it's important for you to know and understand the financial capacity that these individuals also are responsible for. They're also responsible for real property transactions in terms of ensuring that they're building new schools where they're needed, that they're maintaining facilities in a healthy environment for students to learn. They set the policy for the school district. In local school districts, they hire the superintendent and they are responsible for all employees, which means they are the employer of the school district. They also approve inter and intra-district requests for attendance, and they handle expulsion hearings for students who have violated policy within the district. They're responsible for developing a technology plan and ensuring that students have the appropriate resources so that they can be successful. And they also are supposed to take community input on local control accountability plans, which are required by the state to be submitted every year to tell the community, the teachers, the students, how instructional delivery will be maintained and provided. And they also are responsible for curriculum choices on state-approved curriculum. It's important that individuals who are running for office and that are elected have the capacity to build relationships with local, city, and state governance, because much of what they do is a partnership with all of those entities. And it's also important to know that many school districts encompass multiple city boundaries. So they may be working with, in some cases, 2 to 5 different local city governances because of the boundaries of their school districts. When you are going to the ballot and you're looking at potential candidates to put the X next to, I would strongly encourage you to look to see what their credentials are in terms of their strategic thinking, whether or not they have capacity to be listeners of their constituency and good communicators in other roles that they have held, because those are the individuals that will be representing you in terms of what is occurring within your local school district. Another elected body would be the Orange County Board of Education. And the Orange County Board of Education is a 5-member board that is broken out by regions within the county. And the board members serve 4-year terms. Every primary, there's an election for half of the board, and their primary roles and responsibilities are very different than a local school district. They are not the employer. They are responsible for approving the county superintendent's annual budget and what we call first and second interims, which are adjustments that are made to that budget throughout the year. They also serve as an appellate body. They hold hearings and render decisions from the local districts. So inter and intra-district, as well as expulsion hearings that are held at the local districts, can be appealed to the county board. In addition to that, they review and hold hearings for charter schools. Those can come on appeal from local districts, as well as direct countywide charter applicants who are interested in starting a charter school can come directly to the County Board of Education. And then they are also responsible for real property transactions on behalf of the Orange County Department of Education. The last body that isn't elected is the Orange County Superintendent of Schools. And unlike a school district where the board is the employer, in this case, this one singular position, the county superintendent, is the employer for the Orange County Department of Education. And currently that position is held by Dr. Alma Harris, and that position is required to be certificated, which means that the county superintendent must hold a teaching credential and must have held a instructional leadership capacity either in a local school district or has taught at some point in time in their career. The county superintendent is the employer for more than 1,300 employees. Approximately half of which are certificated instructional leaders. And it's important to know that they administer programs for some of our most vulnerable populations in Orange County in terms of students: severely disabled, deaf and hard of hearing, autistic, our juvenile court schools, and our foster youth, as well as probation referred students are most often educated in programs operated by the county superintendent. As I mentioned, the county board does approve the county superintendent's budget, but then operationally, the county superintendent is the administrator of that, and it's approximately a $300 million budget that he is working from. The County Department of Education also provides all of the payroll for all school districts and community colleges within Orange County. There is an in-house legal department that houses 5 attorneys, which provides legal resources to our school districts as well as the county superintendent. And there is a number of networks that the county superintendent facilitates with local school districts. All of the superintendents have a network, as well as our chief business officials, to ensure that there's integration and partnership across the county in terms of working together and helping them support each other. So I encourage each of you, as you are learning more, continue to stay invested in our schools. We have elections at the general election and also the primary. So every 2 years, we are rotating school board members, and then the county superintendent is always during the general election. So with that, I will hand back to Letitia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Nina. That was very informative, very timely. Again, I'm sure everyone on this call received more information than they ever have about what the Board of Education actually does. And then additionally, reminding us what our local school boards have the power to influence. I'm seeing signs all over my area, tons of people running for the school board. And you mentioned that there aren't any certifications or requirements necessarily. You don't even have to have a background in education to run for school board. So again, that means that it's more incumbent upon us as voters to do our research, because we can't assume that everyone running for school board that wants a hand in the curriculum and the school environment for our students has any kind of experience or knowledge about what that should look like. And so it's really important that we know what their philosophies are, what their backgrounds are, what their community connections are, to have a good insight about how they'll govern if elected. So thank you for reminding us how important these races are. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So Judge Karen Robinson and Nina Boyd are our live speakers. We had another speaker from the Board of Supervisors, Lachey Rodriguez, who serves as the Chief of Staff for Supervisor Doug Chafee's office, but she had a meeting that she had to attend. So I did mention that I would go over a couple of her points before I went into just some of the things that a mayor and a city council does from my perspective as well. But I wanted to remind everyone that we did start a little bit late, so we'll probably end right around 2:10. And if you can't stay on, this will be recorded so you can view the end part later. So on behalf of Lachey, she serves as the Chief of Staff. And I do want to mention she's a woman of color, a Afro-Latino woman, and it's good to see her in that role at the county level. She serves as the Chief of Staff to the 4th District Supervisor, Doug Chafee, which encompasses the cities of Brea, parts of Buena Park, Anaheim, La Habra, Placentia, and Fullerton. So if you live in those areas, Lachey is your Chief of Staff on behalf of the county supervisors. And the County of Orange is by definition a subsidiary of the state of California. They administer state programs and services. Additionally, they receive federal funding for programs and services. And you probably know this, Orange County has a population of 3.2 million people, so we're not the small suburban county that a lot of people think. We're very large in size, but there are 5 supervisors that cover the entire county with a $7.2 billion budget, which is huge. The Orange County has over 27 departments, such as the Sheriff's Department, Probation, Court, Social Services, Public Works, Transportation, Medi-Cal, and Mental Health Services. Additionally, they have departments comprised of waste and recycling services, and then they also oversee the Registrar of Voters. So it's important that you know that the county is in charge of all of those things. Lachey wanted to just put a plug in for the vote centers that luckily were approved the last election cycle. And vote centers allow OC registered voters to vote in person, provided they have an appointment due to COVID at any location in Orange County, regardless of where you live. And so again, we had the luxury of having these vote centers the last election to kind of be able to test these out. And I think they were very successful, but there are also voting drop centers that Lachey wanted to mention that you can drop your ballot off at any of those locations. And I believe they're picked up every day once that cycle starts to begin voting. And then of course you can put your ballot in the mail as well. Additional information can be found at ocvote.com. Lachey wanted to mention that. And I think Chris mentioned that, you can track your vote. You can do that as well on ocvote.com. Once you put your ballot in the mail or a drop box or even at a vote center, if you want to ensure that it was counted, you can do that by tracking your ballot and by visiting ocvote.com. So we'll thank Lachey for all of that information, even though she couldn't be with us today. Again, My name is Letitia Clark, and I serve as the Mayor Pro Tem for the City of Tustin on the Tustin City Council. I was elected in 2016. And as Nina mentioned, also council races are supposed to be nonpartisan. You will not see a D or an R by the name of someone on the ballot running for city council, because it is supposed to be nonpartisan. The issues that we have a purview over impact the entire community, and it shouldn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. It really should be based on what the needs of the community are. And again, that requires some research on your part to see what kind of perspective a council member will have despite their party affiliation, and how they'll govern once elected. It's important to know that in many of the cities in Orange County, because we're somewhat small in nature, we don't have a strong mayor role, which means the mayor doesn't always operate separately from the council, where the mayor kind of serves in an executive role and the council serves in a legislative role, but we all serve together. And the mayor has a vote on different ordinances, but does have to sign off on them to make them into law or ordinances for the city. However, a council can decide to do things, make statements like resolutions or proclamations that make a statement on behalf of the entire city. And that often tells you where a city stands on certain issues, very controversial issues sometimes. For instance, the city of Tustin, we didn't pass an ordinance related to racial inequity or discrimination, but we passed a proclamation saying where we stand on these issues. And it should be a message to the community that we were in support of peaceful protest, but against racial inequity. And putting that statement out there in writing can be a very powerful thing. Again, city councils do have the ability, though, to impact laws through ordinances. But I mentioned that strong mayor role. Most cities have a city council, city manager role, where the city manager basically operates as the executive of the city, a CEO of the city essentially. And that person is appointed by the council, but that person manages the rest of the departments in the city. So whoever the city manager is usually very, very important. And they work hand in hand with the mayor in setting the agenda and creating a culture within City Hall. Additionally, the city manager helps in the hiring of the police chief. So if you're concerned about what the culture is like in your police departments, it's really important that you know how your city is set up. Is it a strong mayor role? Is it a strong city manager role, where the city manager has influence on who the police chief and what the environment is like in your local police department? So it's good that you do your research on how your city is set up, but as a citizen, you do have some influence on the culture and the statement that your city sends out there of what they believe. Do they believe in accessibility? Do they believe in transparency and even training? There was something on the debate last night that talked about racial sensitivity training. Is that something that your city believes in? They have the ability to do their own training outside of what even the federal government can require. So it's very important that you know where your city elected officials stand on some of those issues. I won't go too much longer. We're already at a 2:11. I see that there's some questions in the chat as well. I think we can take note of all of those and respond in writing. But I think I don't know who wants to finish us off, but I do want to make a last comment that local elections are so important. And the president, the vice president, often our senators and our Congress people get the airtime needed in order for you to see where they stand on certain issues. The local officials don't often get that same airtime. And as Judge Robinson mentioned, it's extremely expensive to run a campaign to get that message out there. So in order to stay informed as an electorate, as residents, as invested people in the community, we have to do that research. And luckily the internet has a lot available, but it's incumbent upon us to see both sides of every person running. And that just makes our community better. So you being on this call is demonstrative of that already, that you care enough to spend your lunch hour to learn more about how you can be more engaged. So kudos to you and keep it up. We have just a little over a month until the election. So Thank you for that, Devera, and I'll let you sign us off.
Thank you, Leticia. And I'm going to send it back to Carol to sign us off. Carol?
My mind is like, this has been so fantastic, the information that has been shared by all of you. So thank you so very much. I want to remind you that this has been recorded and it will be on our MUZEO.org website for additional info, and it will be posted on Facebook Live as well. I was taking copious notes trying to remember everything. This has been just really very informative. I would like to thank all of the presenters, you know, Dr. Hammond, Christina Cesny, Mayor Pro Tem Letitia Clark, oh, who am I forgetting? Nina Boyd, the Honorable Karen Robinson. It has just been, you can tell I'm a little flustered because I am just so excited and thrilled with this program. So, and I'd also like to thank Berkenda. We started a little bit late because Zoom, you know, technology is the way it is, and we had some trouble with Zoom. And so we certainly appreciate those of you that waited in the chat for us to get started. I want to express to our viewing audience a huge thank you for taking this extra time with us today. Make sure that you let us know that you appreciate these kinds of programs so that we can continue to give relevant information to our community. So on behalf of the MUZEO, I'd like to thank all of the presenters and the audience for being a part of this very powerful program. Vote, because your voice has power and it counts. November 3rd, on behalf of the MUZEO, until the next time, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.